My name is Elena, and I'm 38 years old the day I learned my daughter's life depended on my kidney. Everything inside me shattered. I've always believed that being a nurse made me strong. I've spent years comforting others, holding hands through pain, and keeping my emotions buried beneath a calm professional smile. But nothing in my years of medical training could have prepared me for the day my own daughter became the patient. My daughter, Lila, is 14. She's the kind of kid that lights up any room artistic, clever, and with a mischievous little laugh that always made me forget the world's chaos. It's been just the two of us since she was a toddler. Her father left when she was barely 2 years old, and I've never seen or heard from him since. Raising her alone wasn't easy, but she gave my life purpose. Every night, when she fell asleep with her little hand clutching mine, I reminded myself that I was enough for her and she was everything to me. About 3 months ago, I started noticing little things. She was tired more often, sleeping through her alarms, skipping breakfast. At first, I brushed it off. She's a teenager, I told myself. They all get moody and tired. But then she started throwing up after meals and complaining about swelling in her ankles. My nurse instincts screamed at me that something wasn't right. One evening, after she fainted in the kitchen, I rushed her to the emergency department of the very hospital where I work. I thought I was being paranoid, that it was probably anemia or dehydration. I told the triage nurse her symptoms, and they admitted her for testing. As I watched them wheel her away for blood work, I tried to keep my composure. Nurses aren't supposed to panic, we're trained to be steady, but in that moment, I wasn't a nurse. I was a terrified mother. Hours later, the nephrologist came into the waiting room holding Lila's chart. The look on his face told me everything before he even spoke. "Elena," he said softly. "Lila's kidneys are failing. Her creatinine levels are extremely high. We're going to need to discuss dialysis and, potentially, a transplant." The word transplant hit me like a bullet. My world tilted. I could barely breathe as I asked what her chances were. The doctor said she'd need a kidney soon, within months, or she might not survive. I didn't even hesitate. "Test me," I said. "I'll give her mine." He nodded, moved by my certainty. "That's what we'll do. It's very likely you'll be a good match as her mother." In that moment, I felt something like peace. Fear still twisted in my gut, but at least there was something I could do, something that might save her. Over the next few days, I stayed at the hospital with Lila while she underwent dialysis. We watched old cartoons together. Her hooked up to machines that hummed and beeped. When the doctor called me in for my donor evaluation, I felt almost hopeful. The blood draw was easy. The waiting was the hard part. Every hour felt like an eternity, but deep down, I was certain I'd be a match. I was her mother. Of course, my body would protect her. That's what mothers are meant to do. 2 days later, I got the call to come in for the results. I walked into the nephrology office, my heart pounding, hands trembling. The doctor didn't smile this time. He asked me to sit down. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. "Elena," he began carefully, "the results are complicated." I frowned. "Complicated? What do you mean?" He slid the report toward me. "Your blood type is A positive. Lila's is O negative." I blinked, confused. "That can't be right. Maybe the samples got mixed up?" He shook his head. "We double-checked. There's something else too. We ran the DNA compatibility test. It's standard procedure in parent-child transplant cases." He paused. It came back, showing no genetic relation. For a second, I didn't understand the words. They didn't fit in my brain. "No. Relation?" He sighed. "Elena, I'm sorry. According to the DNA, you and Lila are not biologically related." I felt the room spin. My ears rang. My first thought was that this was an administrative error, a computer glitch. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "That's impossible. I gave birth to her. I was there. I held her in my arms." He nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But scientifically, the data doesn't lie." Couldn't hear anything after that. The walls seemed to close in. I clutched the report like it might change if I held it tighter. My heart felt like it was cracking open. How could that be true? How could the little girl I'd carried for 9 months, the baby I'd nursed, the child whose first word was mama, not be mine? I stumbled out of the office, my vision blurry from tears. I walked through the hospital corridor, past the familiar nurses and doctors, past the posters and patient charts, but suddenly, everything looked foreign. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was shaking so hard I could barely get my keys into the ignition. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. That night, I sat on my couch in the dark, staring at the DNA report over and over, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. And deep down, a horrifying thought began to take root. If I wasn't Lila's biological mother, then whose child was she? But when the test results came back, something impossible showed up. I'm not a match, and worse, I'm not even biologically related to Lila. When I saw the DNA report, I thought it had to be a clerical mistake. I've worked in hospitals long enough to know that errors happen all the time: mislabeled vials, wrong patient numbers, test results entered into the wrong chart. I clung to that explanation like a life raft, desperate for anything that could make sense of what I was seeing. The report in my hands couldn't possibly be right. It said, in plain black letters, no genetic relation detected between donor, Elena Moore, and recipient, Lila Moore. I stared at that sentence until my eyes blurred. Every instinct in my body screamed that it was wrong. Lila was my daughter, she had to be. I'd carried her, felt her kick inside me, watched her grow. There was no universe where she wasn't mine. I marched back into the lab the next morning, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The technician, a young man named Robert, looked startled when I slammed the report down on his counter. "You made a mistake," I said. "You mixed up the samples." He looked nervous but professional. "Mrs. Moore, we follow a triple verification protocol. I checked your identifiers myself." He opened the computer file and showed me the matching patient codes. "Everything is correct. I'm sorry, but there's no error." My throat went dry. "Then test again." "Do it again, right now." He nodded and drew my blood a second time. I sat there on the edge of the chair, hands clenched, staring at the vials as if I could will them to tell the truth. I watched every step, refusing to leave until the samples were logged and labeled. When the results came back later that day, they were identical, no genetic relation. I walked out of the hospital in a fog. The city around me seemed muted, cars passed, people talked, but everything felt far away. I drove home on autopilot, my mind a storm of disbelief and fear. At home, I pulled out the old box from my closet, the one filled with Lila's baby things. Her hospital bracelet was still inside, tiny and pink, with her name handwritten on the tag, Baby Girl Moore. I remembered the nurse who had slipped it around her wrist, smiling as she said, "Congratulations, Mom." That memory replayed in my head over and over. The smell of the hospital that night, the sound of newborns crying, the weight of her in my arms. I remembered the exhaustion and the overwhelming love that hit me all at once. I couldn't have imagined all of that, could I? I had to find answers. The next morning, I went back to the hospital, not as an employee, but as a mother demanding the truth. I asked to speak with someone in medical records from the obstetrics department. The receptionist frowned, clearly confused by my urgency. "Ma'am, those records are from 14 years ago. They're archived. It'll take time to retrieve them." "I'll wait," I said flatly. Hours passed before a manager, an older woman named Mrs. Grant, called me into her office. Her eyes flickered nervously when I explained the situation. "Elena?" she said softly. "There was an incident the year your daughter was born." I froze. "What kind of incident?" She looked uncomfortable. "There was a brief power outage in the maternity ward. The infant monitoring system went down for several hours. During that time, 2 babies born close together were temporarily unaccounted for." My heart dropped. "Unaccounted for? What does that mean?" "It means they weren't sure which baby belonged to which mother," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But everything appeared to be resolved. Both mothers identified their babies, and the records were finalized." I could barely breathe. "You're saying..." They might have switched my baby? She sighed heavily. It was never confirmed. The hospital closed the investigation at the time because both infants were healthy and no one raised further complaints. I felt sick. No one raised complaints because we didn't know, I shouted. You buried this, Mrs. Grant flinched, whispering, Elena, please understand. This was over a decade ago. Everyone involved has since retired. I can give you copies of the logs, but that's all I can do. I didn't care about her excuses. I wanted proof. I needed something, anything, that could tell me who my daughter really was or where my biological child might be. She printed out the birth records, including delivery times and infant ID numbers. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes landed on a single name. Baby girl Parker. Born just 20 minutes after Lila, the world seemed to stop moving for a second. I looked up at Mrs. Grant. Who is baby girl Parker? She hesitated. Her mother was Dana Parker. She delivered in the next room over. I believe they were both discharged around the same time. I copied down the name, every letter burning into my memory. I want to know where she is, I said. I can't disclose that, she replied quickly. Patient confidentiality. Confidentiality? I snapped. You're talking about a child who might have been switched at birth. That's not a privacy issue, that's a life destroyed. Her expression softened. Maybe she saw something in my face, desperation, pain. Something human. She lowered her voice and said, off the record, the Parkers still live in the area. That's all I can tell you. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. The records spread out like puzzle pieces. I traced the times, the delivery notes, the nurse's initials. Everything lined up too perfectly. Lila had been born in room 4B. Dana Parker's baby in 4A. The power outage happened between their births. The babies were weighed, bathed, and tagged after the system rebooted. If anything had gone wrong in those hours, I ran my fingers over Lila's baby bracelet again, my chest tightening. The truth was there, buried in paperwork, time, and negligence. I stared at the name Dana Parker again and whispered it aloud. Somewhere out there, a woman might be raising my biological child. And she didn't even know it. I didn't know how. But I was going to find her. I had to. For Lila. For myself. When they tell me the hospital had an incident involving switched newborns the year Lila was born, my knees nearly give out. The hospital's words hit me like a lightning strike, a mix-up in the maternity ward. For a moment, I couldn't even process what that meant. My mind kept repeating the phrase over and over, like a broken record. A mix-up. As if babies were just files that could be misplaced and refiled. I stared at the documents Mrs. Grant had given me, my hands trembling so violently that the pages rustled like dry leaves. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two newborns lying in tiny hospital bassinets, side by side. I saw nurses moving quickly in the chaos of the power outage. I saw name tags getting switched, bracelets slipping off, and mothers holding the wrong babies completely unaware. I woke up at dawn, drenched in sweat. I knew I couldn't let this go. Not when Lila's life and identity hung in the balance. The next morning, I went straight back to the hospital, this time demanding to see someone higher up. The administrative director, Dr. Randall, was a tall, stoic man I'd seen in passing during my years as a nurse. When I entered his office, I could tell he already knew why I was there. His expression was a careful mask of professionalism. Dr. Randall, I began, my voice shaking. I was told there was a mix-up when my daughter was born. I need the full report from that night. The unedited one. He sighed and gestured for me to sit. Elena, I've reviewed the notes. There was a temporary loss of power that disrupted the newborn identification system. The staff did manual verification afterward, and everything was resolved. I leaned forward, glaring at him. Then explain how my DNA doesn't match my daughter's. Hesitated. It's impossible to say without further testing. Impossible? I snapped. You mean inconvenient? He frowned. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. This was 14 years ago. I stood up, slamming my hand on his desk. Emotion? That's my child we're talking about. 14 years of love, care, birthdays, doctor's visits, and now you're telling me it might have all been based on a hospital error? His silence was answer enough. Give me the names of everyone who worked that night, I demanded. I can't release staff names without a legal order, he replied calmly. I felt rage bubbling up. The kind of cold fury I'd only ever seen in grieving families, and now I understood them. Then I'll get one, I said, and stormed out. By the time I reached home, I'd already decided what to do. If the hospital wouldn't help me, I'd find the truth myself. Her name was Christina Nguyen, a no-nonsense medical attorney with a reputation for digging deep into hospital negligence cases. After explaining everything, she agreed to meet with me. When I showed her the DNA report and the hospital logs, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up and said, Elena, this isn't just a mistake. If what you're saying is true, this is grounds for a major lawsuit and possibly criminal negligence. But I didn't care about lawsuits. I just want to find my real daughter, I said softly. She nodded. Then we start by tracking every record from that night. Births, staff rosters, incident reports, everything. The next week was a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and sleepless nights. Christina filed legal requests for hospital archives, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to surface. One document stood out, a nursing log time-stamped during the blackout. It listed baby girl Moore and baby girl Parker under temporary holding due to power failure. Both entries were marked verified manually after the system came back online. Initialed by a nurse I didn't recognize, Nora L. Who was Nora L? I'd worked at that hospital for years and never met anyone by that name. Christina noted it down immediately. We also discovered that no official follow-up testing was ever done to confirm the infants' identities once power was restored. The hospital simply relied on handwritten notes and the mother's verbal confirmations. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. It wasn't just a simple mix-up, it was negligence buried under bureaucracy. 2 babies had been placed into the wrong cribs, and no one had ever checked afterward. One afternoon, after poring over old logs for hours, Christina looked up and said, Elena, I think I found something. She slid a scanned file across her desk. It was a list of patient discharges from that night. My name was there. So was Dana Parker's. Our babies released within 15 minutes of each other. Under Dana's file, in faded handwriting, I could make out a note. Infant bracelet reissued, tag misprint. My stomach dropped. Reissued? Christina nodded grimly. It looks like Dana's baby's bracelet was replaced that night. That's when the power outage occurred. I leaned back, feeling dizzy. It all connected: the outage, the bracelet issue, the nurse's initials. I went home and stared at Lila's old bracelet again, turning it over in my hands. The handwriting on it was faded, the ink smudged from years of storage. What if that wasn't her original tag at all? What if it belonged to another baby entirely? I needed to find Dana Parker. I needed to know who she was and what had happened to her child. I spent the next several nights searching online. The name was common, but after cross-referencing hospital records and local addresses, I found one match that fit the timeline. A woman named Dana Parker living just a few miles away in the suburbs. Her profile showed a smiling photo, her arm around a teenage girl with auburn hair. The girl's name was Grace. My breath caught. Grace looked about Lila's age, and something about her face, something in her eyes, felt hauntingly familiar. I sat frozen in front of my screen, staring at the photo until tears blurred my vision. Could it be? Could this girl, this stranger, be my biological daughter? I don't know it yet, but that name will soon lead me to the real mother of the child I've been raising. Tracking down baby girl Parker leads me to a woman named Dana Parker, and when I see her, it's like looking in a mirror of fate. After days of searching through social media, public records, and local listings, I finally found her. Dana Parker, age 37, lives in the same city as me, only 8 miles away. Her profile photo showed a woman with soft brown hair and kind eyes, holding a teenage girl close to her. The girl Grace was around Lila's age. It wasn't just the resemblance that shook me. It was the way Grace smiled, the same dimple I saw in the mirror every morning. My dimple. I zoomed in on the photo, my heart pounding. She even had the same small mole on her right cheek that I've had since childhood. The more I looked, the more undeniable it became. Grace looked like me. I sat back, trembling. I'd spent 14 years loving and raising a child who might not be mine, and now I was staring at another girl who might actually be. I didn't know how to approach Dana. How do you tell a stranger that your babies might have been switched at birth? How do you say, your daughter might be mine, and mine might be yours? I drafted a message 3 times and deleted it each time. Finally, I decided on honesty. I wrote, "Hi Dana, my name is Elena Moore. I know this might sound strange, but I believe our babies may have been born at the same hospital 14 years ago and that something went terribly wrong that night. Could we talk?" Then I hit send. For 2 days, there was no reply. I barely ate. Every sound from my phone made my heart lurch. When she finally responded, it was short. "I don't know who you are or what kind of scam this is, but leave us alone." My stomach dropped. I immediately replied, attaching the hospital record logs and the note about the power outage. I told her she could verify my name and birth date with the hospital itself. Then I waited. An hour later, another message came through. "If this is real, meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., at Cafe Verona. Bring proof." The next day, I arrived early. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I sat in the corner booth, clutching the folder that contained everything: Lila's DNA test, the hospital reports, the birth records. At exactly 2 p.m., Dana walked in. She looked almost exactly like her photos, tired eyes, soft smile. But there was a guarded tension about her. When our eyes met, it was like time stopped. She sat down slowly, clutching her purse like a shield. "So," she said carefully, "you're the woman who thinks my child is hers." Her words stung. But I didn't blame her. "I know how insane this sounds," I began. "But please, just look at this." I slid the documents across the table. She hesitated, then began reading. As her eyes moved down the pages, her face went pale. Her hands trembled as she flipped through each page. The incident report, the nurse's initials, the time of birth. "This," she whispered, "this can't be real." "I didn't believe it either," I said quietly. "But my daughter needs a kidney transplant. When they tested me, they found out I wasn't biologically related to her. That's how all this started." Her eyes filled with tears. Oh my God. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of her daughter, Grace, smiling in a school uniform, holding a paintbrush. My breath caught again. That smile could have been mine at 14. Dana looked at me, her voice trembling. "You said your daughter is sick?" I nodded. "She's on dialysis. The doctors say she needs a transplant soon." She swallowed hard. "Grace has always been healthy. But," she hesitated, "she's never really looked like me. My family used to joke that she must have gotten her features from some distant ancestor. I thought nothing of it. But she has your eyes." I couldn't speak. We both sat there, 2 mothers who'd unknowingly been living each other's lives. 2 women whose worlds had been built on a lie neither of us caused. "I need to know the truth," Dana said finally. "If there's even a chance this happened, we have to find out." We agreed to do a DNA test, both of us, both girls. It would take a few days for results. In the meantime, we decided not to tell the girls anything until we were certain. As I left the cafe, Dana reached out and touched my arm. "Elena," she said softly. "Whatever happens, I'm so sorry. For both of us." I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat beside Lila's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. She looked so peaceful, completely unaware that her entire world might soon change. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "No matter what, you'll always be my daughter." The next morning, Dana called. Her voice was quiet but steady. I told Grace about the test, she said. I didn't give her details. Just that it's for medical reasons. I hesitated, unsure if that was the right move. And how did she take it? She asked if it had something to do with you, Dana said. I think she feels it too, the connection. I hung up and sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know what the DNA would show, but in my heart, I already knew. When she mentions her daughter's blood type the same as mine, we both realize the impossible is true. Sitting across from Dana, it feels like we've both lost and found something at the same time. A week had passed since that tense meeting at the cafe, and the DNA results were finally ready. When I saw the envelope in my mailbox that morning, my hands began to shake uncontrollably. It felt heavier than paper should, as if it carried the weight of my entire existence. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there in my kitchen, staring at it, feeling like the air itself was too thick to breathe. Lila was at her friend's house, blissfully unaware of the storm waiting to swallow her whole. I wanted to protect her from this truth, but I knew I couldn't. I called Dana. Her voice was trembling too when she answered. I got mine, she said. I haven't opened it yet. Do you want to meet? I asked softly. Yes, she said after a pause. Same place? Cafe Verona, 2 p.m. again. Only this time, the air between us was heavier. We didn't make small talk. We just sat there, envelopes on the table between us, like two bombs waiting to go off. On 3? I whispered. She nodded. 1, 2, 3. The sound of tearing paper filled the silence. I unfolded the pages slowly, my eyes scanning the lines until they landed on the only one that mattered. Probability of maternity, 0%. I froze. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my head. Everywhere. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. I looked up at Dana. She wasn't crying yet, just staring at her paper, her mouth slightly open. Then she whispered, Grace isn't mine either. Our eyes met, and for a second, everything else disappeared. The noise of the cafe, the hum of life outside, even my own thoughts gone. All that existed was the truth sitting between us. I'd been raising her daughter, she'd been raising mine. The tears came then, silent, endless, unstoppable. I covered my face, with my hands shaking as the truth tore through me. Dana reached across the table and touched my arm. Her hand was warm, trembling like mine. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely audible. I took a deep, shaky breath. We protect them. We tell them when it's right, but first, we make sure Lila survives this. Dana nodded. You said she needs a kidney? Yes. The doctors say soon. I was supposed to be her donor, but I gestured helplessly toward the paper. She looked down at her results again, her lips trembling. Then she said something I never expected. Let me get tested. I blinked. What? Let me see if I'm a match for her. If she's biologically mine, it's my responsibility. I can't just walk away knowing she's sick. Tears filled my eyes again. Dana, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted gently. You raised her. You gave her a beautiful life. This is the least I can do. Her words hit me straight in the heart. There was no jealousy, no anger, only love. The kind of love a mother feels, no matter whose body gave birth to her child. We left the cafe together and drove straight to the hospital. As we sat in the waiting room for her to get tested, I couldn't stop glancing at her, the woman who, by all logic, should have been a stranger, yet felt like a part of me now. The results came back 3 days later. The doctor called both of us into his office. Dana, he said, you're a perfect match. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Relief washed through me so powerfully that I nearly sobbed right there. Dana let out a shaky breath, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. That means… Yes, the doctor said softly. It confirms the maternity results. She's your biological daughter. Dana looked at me, her eyes full of tears. She's still your daughter too, Elena, she said firmly. You're her mother in every way that matters. I tried to smile, but it came out broken. Thank you, I whispered. When I got home that evening, I sat beside Lila's bed again. She was asleep, her small frame looking even more fragile under the hospital blanket. I wanted to tell her the truth, but how do you tell a child that everything she's ever known, her name, her family, her very identity, might be a lie? Dana came by later that night, carrying a small notebook. I've started writing letters, she said. For Grace. For Lila. In case they hate us for this later. I want them to know none of this was our fault. I nodded, tears welling up. That's beautiful. She smiled faintly. We'll figure it out together. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. For 14 years, I thought I'd lost the other half of my family. But now, sitting beside Dana, I realized we'd both been missing each other without even knowing it. Over the next few weeks, the hospital scheduled the surgery. Dana passed every test, every evaluation. She was healthy, ready, and determined. The doctor said Lila's best chance was within the next month. I thought that would be the end of the nightmare, that everything would finally start to heal. But I was wrong. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it rips open wounds you didn't even know existed. Before I can even process it, Dana offers her kidney to the daughter she's never known. Hearing Dana volunteer her kidney leaves me speechless. It's the purest act of love I've ever witnessed. For days after her decision, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I looked at her, I saw strength I didn't even know existed. Here was a woman who had just learned that her real daughter had been taken from her, that she'd been raising a child who wasn't biologically hers, and yet, her first instinct wasn't anger or self-pity. It was compassion. She didn't owe me anything. She didn't owe Lila anything, but she chose to help anyway. We both sat in the hospital's family waiting area after she'd finished her preliminary tests. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Dana looked tired but determined. You'd do the same if it were Grace, she said quietly. I would, I admitted. But that doesn't make what you're doing any less extraordinary. She smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe it's just what mothers do. Those words stayed with me. I'd always believed motherhood was defined by blood, the miracle of birth, the bond of DNA. But in that moment, watching her sign surgical consent forms for a girl she'd never met, I realized love was its own kind of biology. A week later, we got the official confirmation. Dana was a perfect donor match. The relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed in tears. But almost immediately, that relief twisted into something darker: fear. Would Lila want this? Would she even understand it? So far, we hadn't told her the truth. She still thought Dana was a family friend, a kind woman who'd agreed to help. I knew how fragile she was, how drained the dialysis had made her, how pale and thin she'd become. The last thing I wanted was to pile more pain onto her shoulders, but guilt gnawed at me. Every time I saw Dana at her bedside, chatting gently with Lila or bringing her flowers, I felt like I was watching two worlds collide, one built on lies, the other on truth. The night before her pre-op appointment, Dana and I sat outside the hospital on a bench under the soft glow of a streetlight. The summer air was thick, and the hum of the city seemed distant. She looks so much like you, Dana said quietly. I glanced at her. You think so? She nodded. Not just the face, the way she talks, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. I see myself in Grace, but I see my spirit in Lila. It's strange, isn't it? I swallowed the lump in my throat. It's more than strange. It's cruel. She sighed. I used to think I'd done everything right. I loved Grace. Worked hard. Gave her the best I could. But now I can't stop thinking about all the things I missed: her first steps, her first words, her childhood. It feels like someone pressed fast forward on my life and I missed half the story. Her voice broke, and I put my hand on hers. You didn't miss everything, I said softly. You raised Grace into a wonderful girl, and now you're saving Lila's life. Maybe that's how it was meant to be: messy, painful, but somehow still right. She smiled weakly. You sound like you actually believe that. I'm trying to. We sat in silence for a while. I could see tears glistening in her eyes, but she blinked them away. That was Dana strong even when she was breaking inside. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The doctors prepared both of them carefully, explaining the risks and recovery times. Lila still didn't know who her donor truly was. Every time I looked at her, I wanted to tell her to beg her forgiveness for keeping such a life-altering secret, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until after she was safe. The day before the operation, I came home from the hospital exhausted. My phone buzzed a message from Dana. No matter what happens tomorrow, thank you. For loving her when I couldn't. For being her mother when fate stole that from me. I stared at the screen for a long time. Tears welling up. I typed back. You'll always be her mother too. And after tomorrow, she'll know that. The next morning, we met at the hospital before sunrise. The corridors were quiet, sterile, almost sacred in their stillness. Dana wore a hospital gown and a brave smile. Lila was in her room, half asleep, unaware that the woman walking past her door was her biological mother, her literal savior. Before the nurses wheeled Dana toward pre-op, she reached for my hand. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Don't let her hate me when she finds out. She has too much of you in her for that. Dana laughed softly through her tears. Then she squeezed my hand and let the nurses guide her away. I watched her disappear down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing until there was nothing left but silence. I wanted to believe everything was going to be fine, that after this surgery, life would finally start to heal. But something deep inside me twisted with unease. Because secrets have a way of surfacing, especially the ones you try hardest to bury. And Lila, fragile as she was, wasn't as unaware as I thought. But days before the operation, Lila overhears a conversation that changes everything. Lila's voice behind me made my heart stop. What do you mean she's not my mom? The words sliced through the air, sharp and echoing. I froze mid-sentence, the coffee mug in my hand slipping from my fingers and shattering on the kitchen floor. I turned around slowly, dread rising like ice in my veins. Lila stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale, but what scared me most was the look of betrayal etched into her expression. Dana was standing beside me. We'd just been talking quietly about the upcoming surgery, about how we'd tell Lila the truth after the operation. We thought she was asleep upstairs. But she wasn't. She'd been standing there long enough to hear the one sentence that changed everything. Lila, I whispered, my voice trembling. Sweetheart, please let me explain. Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step back. Explain what, Mom? That you're not my real mother? That my entire life is some kind of lie? Dana looked terrified, guilt flashing across her face. Lila, please, it's not like that. Don't! Lila shouted, her voice breaking. Don't talk to me like you know me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that nothing had changed, that she was still my little girl, but my body wouldn't move. I finally managed to whisper, You are my daughter. You always will be. Nothing in this world could ever change that. She shook her head, crying harder. You lied to me. All this time, you knew? No, I said quickly. I didn't know until recently. I found out during the donor testing. I was going to tell you after the surgery, I swear. Her voice cracked. So all those times you said you'd give me your kidney, that you'd do anything for me, you already knew you couldn't? Tears burned my eyes. Lila, I meant every word. I would have if I could. But you needed someone who could actually help you. And Dana? Dana? She interrupted, turning toward the woman who'd been silently crying beside me. That's her name? Dana took a hesitant step forward. Lila, I'm your biological mother. The room went completely still. Lila stared at her, disbelief written across her face. Then she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. My what? No. No, this is insane. I know, Dana said softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know it's too much, but I swear to you, I didn't know either. You were switched at birth. It wasn't anyone's choice. I only found out a few weeks ago. Lila shook her head violently. You're both lying. She turned to me, her voice trembling with rage. How could you keep this from me? You let me sit in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, thinking you were going to save me, and all along you knew you couldn't because I'm not even yours? My knees felt weak. I sank into a chair, covering my face with my hands. I was trying to protect you, I whispered. Protect me? She repeated, her voice rising. From what? The truth? I looked up, meeting her gaze. Yes, because I didn't want to lose you. Her expression softened for just a moment, and then hardened again. Well, you lost me anyway. She turned and bolted out the front door. Dana and I chased after her, calling her name, but she didn't stop. She ran down the street barefoot, her hospital bracelet still on her wrist. We found her hours later, sitting by the lake near our house. She was hugging her knees, her face streaked with tears. I sat down a few feet away, careful not to get too close. Can I sit? I asked quietly. She didn't look at me. You already are. I swallowed hard. Lila, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please, don't shut me out. I'm still the same mom who read you bedtime stories, who stayed up with you when you were sick, who braided your hair before school. Her voice was small. But you're not my real mom. Yes, I am, I said firmly, my tears finally falling. I may not have given birth to you, but I've loved you every single day since you were placed in my arms. That's real. That's as real as it gets. She finally looked at me, her eyes red and tired. Then who am I, Mom? Who am I supposed to be now? My heart broke at the question. I reached out, slowly, but she didn't move. Dana was standing behind us, silent, watching with tears streaming down her face. I glanced at her and nodded slightly. She stepped forward, kneeling beside Lila. You're both of us, she said softly. You don't have to choose. I know this is confusing and unfair, but we'll figure it out together. Lila didn't respond. She just stared out at the water, lost in thought. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she said in a trembling voice, I don't want the transplant. My breath caught. Lila. What? She turned to us, her face set with a strange, determined calm. I don't want her. Kidney. I don't want anything from either of you. Dana gasped. Sweetheart, please don't say that. You'll die without it. Lila shook her head, tears falling again. I don't care. I don't even know who I am anymore. Maybe I don't deserve to be saved. Her words shattered me. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her she was wrong, but all I could do was sit there, helpless, watching my daughter crumble under the weight of a truth she never asked for. The sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of gold and red. The reflection of the light flickered across Lila's face, the face of a child who had just lost her sense of belonging. I knew then that saving her body wasn't enough. I had to save her spirit too. When she finally comes out, she says she doesn't want the transplant anymore, not from Dana, not from anyone. Lila's refusal to accept the transplant sends shockwaves through everyone involved. When she said she didn't want the surgery, I thought it was just a reaction, a burst of anger she'd regret after cooling down. But as the hours passed and her words sank in, I realized she meant it. My daughter, the girl I had fought so hard to save, was choosing to die. Back at the hospital, the doctors were gentle but firm. Elena, one of them said softly, she's a minor, but we can't force her. Ethically and legally, it's complicated. We need her consent. I nodded numbly, staring at the blank consent form sitting on the counter. Her signature line sat there, empty and defiant, mocking me. Dana was pacing the room, tears streaking her cheeks. This is my fault, she whispered. If we hadn't told her, she'd be in surgery right now. I shook my head. No. The truth had to come out. But now we have to help her see that it doesn't change who she is or who we are to her. Lila refused to speak to either of us for days. She locked herself in her hospital room, barely eating, refusing treatment. Nurses came and went, trying to coax her into conversation, but she'd just stare at the wall, The light that used to shine in her eyes was gone, replaced by emptiness. One evening, I brought her favorite blanket from home, the soft, faded one with little daisies on it. I sat on her bed, wrapping it around her shoulders. She didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away either. "Do you remember when you were 8?" I said quietly, "and you fell off your bike trying to race the neighbor's kid?" No answer. "You broke your arm," I continued, my voice trembling. "You cried so hard, and I told you you'd never have to face pain alone. I meant that then. And I mean it now. You don't have to do this alone, Lila." Her lip quivered. "You lied about everything." I swallowed. "I lied because I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. But I'll never stop loving you." She turned her head slowly, her voice fragile. "Then why does it hurt so much?" I had no answer. I just reached for her hand and held it. Meanwhile, Dana was falling apart. She blamed herself for every tear, every angry silence. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the guilt eating her alive. She spent hours sitting in the hospital chapel, whispering prayers I couldn't hear. Eventually, we agreed it was time to get professional help. We brought in Dr. Amber Lewis, a therapist who specialized in trauma and identity loss. The first session was brutal. Lila sat there with her arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact. But Dr. Lewis was patient, calm, and gentle. She spoke to Lila like someone who understood what it felt like to have your world stolen from you. Little by little, Lila began to open up. She confessed that she felt like she didn't belong anywhere now, that she wasn't Dana's daughter, but she wasn't really mine either. She said she felt like a mistake that shouldn't have existed. Hearing those words tore me apart. I wanted to scream at the universe for doing this to her, for making an innocent child bear the weight of a hospital's negligence. Dana and I started attending sessions too. Dr. Lewis encouraged all of us to come together, both families. So we arranged a meeting at the therapist's office. Me, Lila, Dana, and Grace. The air in the room that day was thick with tension. Grace sat nervously beside her mother, while Lila sat across from them, her eyes guarded. "Hi," Grace said softly. "I guess we're kind of sisters, huh?" Lila didn't respond at first. But when she finally looked at Grace, something shifted. Maybe she saw herself, or maybe she just saw someone else who was lost in all this too. They started talking. Slowly. Hesitantly. About school, about music, about what it felt like to have everything turned upside down. By the end of the session, they were both crying and hugging. Dana and I sat on opposite sides of the room, tears streaming down our faces. For the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. But life doesn't give you healing without testing it. A week later, just when it seemed like Lila was starting to accept therapy and even talk to Dana a little, disaster struck. It was a Sunday afternoon. Lila had been out of bed more lately, trying to rebuild her strength. She even smiled at me that morning, a small, fragile smile that made my heart ache with hope. I went downstairs to make her lunch. The sound of glass shattering made me look up. A tray had fallen. I rushed to her room, calling her name. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Lila was on the floor, her body limp, her skin pale as paper. "Lila!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside her. Dana came running from the hallway, horror written all over her face. We shouted for help, and within seconds, the room filled with nurses. I held Lila's hand as they worked on her, whispering her name over and over, praying to anyone who might be listening. The monitor beeped erratically. Her oxygen levels were dropping fast. The doctor's face turned grim. "We need to get her to the ICU now." They wheeled her out of the room, and I followed close behind, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the truth, not biology, not the past. All I could think about was my daughter lying there, her life slipping away. Then, out of nowhere, Lila collapses, and we rush her to the hospital in a panic. The monitors beep wildly as Lila's condition worsens, her body is shutting down. I can still hear that sound in my dreams, the relentless beeping, the panicked voices, the rustle of nurses rushing through the ICU. My heart felt like it was being torn apart with every shrill alarm that echoed through the room. Lila lay unconscious, her small body hooked up to machines that seemed to be fighting a losing battle. Her kidney function has dropped to critical levels, the doctor said, his voice steady but grave. We're looking at hours, maybe a day or two at best. We need a transplant immediately, or she won't survive. His words felt like knives. I grabbed the edge of the bed to steady myself. What about Dana? I asked, my voice trembling. She's been preparing for the surgery, she's ready. The doctor's expression shifted, and I instantly knew something was wrong. I'm afraid Dana can't proceed right now. She's developed a bacterial infection. It's not safe to operate. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. You're saying we've lost her only chance? He didn't answer, and that silence was worse than any words. Dana, who had been standing behind me, covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. No, she whispered. No, please, test me again. I'll do whatever it takes. Give me antibiotics. I'll wait. I'll fight it. The doctor shook his head gently. It's too risky. The infection could spread if we proceed. Dana broke down sobbing, collapsing into a chair. I wrapped my arms around her, though my own body was shaking. I wanted to be strong for her, for both of us, but inside, I felt completely hollow. I turned back to the doctor. Then find another donor, anyone. Please. We're searching, he said, but finding a compatible match this quickly is nearly impossible. Those words echoed in my mind. Nearly impossible. I sat beside Lila's bed, clutching her hand. Her skin felt cold. Tubes ran from her arms, monitors blinked beside her, and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator filled the silence. I whispered through my tears, please don't leave me, baby. I can't lose you. Dana stayed too, refusing to go home despite the doctor's orders. She sat quietly on the other side of the bed, watching her daughter, the daughter she'd only just discovered. Hours passed. No new donors, no miracle calls. Just the slow, unbearable ticking of the clock. Then, suddenly, Grace, Dana's other daughter, walked into the room. She looked scared but determined. Mom, she said softly, I want to get tested. Dana's head snapped up. Grace, no, you're too young. I'm 14, Grace said firmly. I can help. You said she's my sister. If I can save her, I will. Tears filled Dana's eyes. Sweetheart, you can't. But Grace was already looking at the doctor. Please. Just test me. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. We can run preliminary labs. But you need to understand, even if you're a partial match, you're underage. We'd need a court order to proceed. I squeezed Grace's hand, my heart aching with both love and fear. You're so brave, I whispered. But your safety matters too, okay? An hour later, the doctor returned with the results. She's a partial match, he said. It's not perfect, but it could work. Dana gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Oh my God. But, the doctor continued, the law requires parental and judicial approval. We'll need a court ruling before we can move forward. I didn't hesitate. Then we'll get one. We contacted Christina, my lawyer, who immediately filed an emergency petition. Within hours, we were in a small courtroom, standing before a judge who looked at us with tired but sympathetic eyes. Your Honor, Christina argued, this is a matter of life and death. Grace understands the risks and is willing to save her sister. The judge sighed, looking down at Grace. You're a brave young lady, he said gently. But the law is clear. You're a minor, and this surgery carries significant risk. I can't authorize it. Dana broke down, pleading. Please, she's dying. I'm sorry, the judge said softly. My hands are tied. The gavel struck. The sound was final. Devastating. Dana held her close, whispering apologies. I just stood there on the courthouse steps, staring into nothing. When we returned to the hospital, the nurse met us at the door with a grave expression. Lila's blood pressure is dropping. You should come quickly. My legs gave out beneath me. Dana caught me just before I fell. We ran down the corridor together, the same horrible beeping growing louder with every step. When we reached her room, the monitors were flashing red. The doctor was shouting orders. "Prepare for cardiac support. Move, move." I pressed myself against the wall, sobbing, watching as they worked on her. Every second felt like an eternity. "Come on, Lila," I whispered. "Please, baby, come back to me." And then my phone rang. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. The number was unfamiliar, marked as private. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice shaking. A calm voice answered. "Is this Elena Moore?" "Yes," I said weakly. "This is Dr. Harper from St. Joseph's Hospital. I've been reviewing historical medical data regarding a patient mix-up from 14 years ago. You need to hear this." I blinked, trying to process. "Now? My daughter's dying." "I understand," the voice said urgently. "But this could save her life. There's another woman connected to that night. A nurse named Nora Lancaster. She may still be alive, and according to our files, she's related to Dana Parker." I froze, my heart pounding. "Related? How?" "She's Dana's aunt. And according to her records, she's O negative, the same blood type as your daughter." Hope flickered like a spark in the darkness. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice breaking. "She lives 2 towns over. If she's willing, she might be the match you need." I hung up and turned to Dana, my hands shaking. "There's someone else," I whispered. "Someone who might save her." Dana's eyes widened. "Who?" "Your aunt, Nora Lancaster." And for the first time in days, I saw something I hadn't seen in Dana's eyes since this nightmare began: hope. Just as I lose all faith, a phone call from an unknown number offers a final chance at saving Lila's life. The caller introduces herself as someone from the hospital records department. She has information I need to hear immediately. Even now, I can remember every word she said, every pause between her sentences. I had been standing in the ICU hallway, clutching my phone with trembling hands, my heart caught between despair and a fragile thread of hope. The woman's voice was calm but urgent. "Elena, you don't know me, but my name is Dr. Harper. I was part of the investigation into the newborn mix-up 14 years ago. I found someone who might be able to help your daughter." I could barely form words. "Who?" "A nurse named Nora Lancaster," she said. "She worked the night of the power outage, the night your babies were switched." My mind spun. That name, I've seen it before. She signed the incident log. "Yes," Dr. Harper confirmed. "Nora left shortly after that night, under strange circumstances. But according to our records, she's a blood relative of Dana Parker, her aunt. And she's O negative, which could make her a compatible donor." It felt like fate, or maybe mercy, had finally decided to give us one last chance. "Do you know where I can find her?" I asked breathlessly. Dr. Harper gave me an address in a small town about 40 miles away. "She's retired now, lives alone. But she's been in contact with me about that night for years. She always felt guilty for not being able to do more." I didn't wait another second. I told Dana what I'd learned, and within an hour, we were on the road. The drive felt endless. Rain lashed against the windshield, thunder rumbling in the distance, as if the world itself was warning us that this hope might come with a price. Dana sat in silence beside me, her fingers gripping the hem of her jacket. "I haven't seen Nora in over a decade," she said quietly. "She and my mom had a falling out. I didn't even know she was still alive." "She might be the only person who can save Lila," I said, my voice trembling. When we finally pulled up to a small, weathered cottage at the end of a gravel road, everything was quiet. The porch light was dim, flickering in the storm. I knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it creaked open. An older woman stood there, frail, with gray hair tied back in a loose bun and tired, wise eyes that seemed to hold years of unspoken regret. "Nora?" Dana whispered. Nora froze. Her eyes widened, recognition flashing in them. "Dana?" Her voice was soft, cracked with emotion. "My God, it's been so long." Dana started to cry. "We need your help." We sat in her small living room, surrounded by the faint scent of lavender and old books. The walls were lined with framed photos, most of them of hospital staff, newborn babies, and smiling nurses. Nora listened quietly as I told her everything: the DNA tests, the transplant, the infection, and Lila's rapidly declining condition. When I finished, she sat still for a long moment, staring at her hands. Then she whispered, "I knew something like this would happen one day." I frowned. "You knew?" Tears filled her eyes. The night of the blackout, I was in charge of the nursery. 2 of the ID bracelets fell off during the chaos, one from your baby, Elena, and one from Dana's. I told the supervisor, but she said not to make a fuss. We were already short-staffed, and the hospital didn't want to admit fault. I begged them to run tests afterward, but they shut me down. My chest tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried," she said weakly. "I even filed a report, but they buried it. And after I spoke up, they pushed me out quietly. I've lived with that guilt ever since." Dana reached across the table, her voice breaking. "You could have stopped all this." Nora nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I've hated myself for it every day." The silence that followed was heavy with grief and regret. Then Nora straightened slowly, her expression hardening with resolve. "If my blood can save that child, if I can undo even a small piece of this, then I'll do it." I stared at her, stunned. "You'd really?" She nodded. "Test me. I'm old, but I'm still healthy. I won't let another life suffer because of that night." We drove her back to the hospital immediately. Dana held her aunt's hand the whole way, silently crying. When we arrived, the doctors ran her labs. I waited outside the testing room, pacing, praying, trembling. An hour later, the nephrologist came out, holding a chart. His face was unreadable. "Well?" I asked, my heart racing. "She's a match," he said finally. "A strong one." Dana gasped and covered her mouth. I felt tears spill down my cheeks. For the first time in weeks, real hope surged through me. But the doctor's tone darkened. "There's a risk. Nora's age and medical history make her a fragile candidate. The surgery would be high risk for her." Before I could respond, Nora stepped out of the room. "I don't care about the risks," she said firmly. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'm doing this." The doctor hesitated, clearly impressed by her resolve. "We'll start preparations. The surgery can be done within 48 hours. Nora smiled faintly, turning to me. "Elena, I can't change the past. But maybe I can give that girl a future." I took her hand, overwhelmed by gratitude and sorrow all at once. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." That night, as I sat beside Lila's bed, I looked at her pale face and brushed her hair gently. "Someone's coming to save you," I whispered. "Someone who's been part of your story all along." The machines beeped softly, steady for now, but I knew time was slipping away. The next morning, Nora would go into surgery, and as I looked at her frail figure resting in the adjacent room, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was giving more than just a kidney. She was giving us all a chance at redemption. The surgery is scheduled, but there's no guarantee Nora will survive it. The day of the surgery feels like standing between life and death. The hospital was eerily quiet that morning, the kind of silence that hums with tension and prayer. Every step I took echoed through the hallways. When I reached the pre-op area, I saw Nora already in her gown, her frail body dwarfed by the sterile white bed. The IV line glinted under the fluorescent lights. Despite everything, she looked peaceful, almost serene. Lila lay in the room next to hers, unconscious, her monitors blinking steadily but weakly. The doctors had sedated her early to stabilize her vitals before the transplant. She looked so small, so fragile, swallowed up by the tubes and wires that kept her alive. I pressed my forehead to her hand and whispered, "You hold on, baby. You're stronger than you think." When I stepped into Nora's room, she smiled faintly. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said in a raspy voice. "I haven't," I admitted, sitting beside her. "You should rest. You'll need your strength." She chuckled softly. "Sweetheart, I've been carrying the weight of this guilt for 14 years. This is the first night I'll sleep peacefully, even if it's my last." Her words sent a shiver through me. Don't say that. You'll be fine. She squeezed my hand gently. No promises, Elena. But I'm not afraid. The doctors came in soon after to run final checks. Dana was there too. Standing quietly in the corner, her face pale and streaked with tears. She bent down and kissed Nora's forehead. Thank you, she whispered. For everything you're doing for me, for Lila, for all of us. Nora smiled weakly. Your family. This is what family does even when we fail each other. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, I followed for as long as I could. Just before she disappeared through the double doors, she looked back at me and said, "Family finds a way." Those 3 words burned into my soul. Then the doors swung shut, and she was gone. I returned to the waiting area, where time seemed to crawl. Dana and I sat side by side in silence, our hands tightly clasped. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly. Each second felt like a drop of water in an endless storm. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 excruciating hours of pacing, praying, and imagining every possible outcome. Nurses came and went, offering polite smiles and half-whispered updates. They're still operating, everything's stable so far. But my heart wouldn't calm. At one point, Dana buried her face in her hands and whispered, "If she dies because of me," I grabbed her shoulders firmly. "Don't, she chose this. We all did what we had to do, she wanted to make it right." When the surgeon finally walked in, his expression was unreadable. I stood so fast my chair toppled over. "Please," I whispered. "Tell me." He took a deep breath. The transplant was successful. Lila's new kidney started functioning almost immediately. She's stable for now. Dana and I both gasped, clutching each other as tears streamed down our faces. Relief hit me like a tidal wave. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, crying so hard I could barely breathe. "She's okay?" I repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it real. "She's okay," the surgeon confirmed gently. "But..." That word "but" froze the air between us. He looked down. Nora's surgery was more complicated. She lost a lot of blood, and her heart stopped briefly during the procedure. We revived her, but she's in critical condition. She's not waking up yet. Dana covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head. "Oh my God." The surgeon continued softly. "She's in a coma. We'll keep her on life support and monitor her closely, but we can't make any guarantees." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Relief and grief tangled together in my chest, suffocating me. Lila was alive, but Nora might not survive the gift that saved her. We were allowed to see Nora later that evening. She looked so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. I took her hand carefully, afraid to hurt her. "Thank you," I whispered through my tears. "You saved her. You saved all of us." Her eyelids didn't flutter, but I liked to imagine she heard me, that somewhere deep inside, she knew what she'd done had mattered. Afterward, I went to Lila's room. She was still asleep, her breathing even, her color better than it had been in weeks. The new kidney was working. I sat beside her and brushed the hair from her forehead. "You did it," I murmured. "You fought so hard." Dana stood in the doorway, watching quietly. "She looks peaceful," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time," I replied. We stood there for a long while, 2 mothers, bound by tragedy and love, watching the miracle we had both prayed for. But miracles, I was learning, never come without a price. Days passed. Lila's condition improved steadily. She began to wake up for short periods, groggy but smiling. Each time she opened her eyes, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But Nora didn't wake up. Her body was stable, her heart strong, but her mind remained somewhere far away. Every day, I sat by her bed, holding her hand and talking to her about Lila, about Grace, about the lives she'd touched. Dana joined me often, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes crying quietly. We both knew that without Nora, none of this would have been possible. One evening, as I was leaving the ICU, I glanced back at Nora's room and whispered, "You gave us life. Now it's time for you to come back to yours." The machines hummed softly in reply. I didn't know if she would ever wake up, but I knew one thing for sure: I owed her everything. As I stand by Nora's bedside, I wonder if her sacrifice will cost her everything. Weeks pass as Lila recovers, and I learn what it means to be a mother beyond biology. Those first few weeks after the surgery felt like living between two worlds, one where miracles existed and another where guilt lingered like a shadow. Lila was alive, stronger every day, smiling again for the first time in months. But Nora still hadn't woken up. Her body rested peacefully, but her spirit seemed far away. The doctor said she could wake up tomorrow, next month, or never. There was no way to know. Lila's room was filled with sunlight now. She had color in her cheeks, her laughter returning little by little. I brought her sketchbook from home, and she spent hours drawing. Sometimes I'd catch her sketching two women standing on either side of a little girl, all holding hands. She never said who they were, but I didn't need to ask. Dana visited every day. The first few times were awkward. Lila didn't know how to act around her. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the push and pull between affection and fear. But Dana never pushed. She just sat by her bed, talking gently, telling her stories about Grace, about her childhood, about the woman she had been before any of this happened. One afternoon, while Dana was reading aloud from a book, Lila suddenly said, "Your voice sounds familiar." Dana smiled softly. "Maybe it's because we share the same blood." Lila didn't answer right away. She looked down at her IV line and whispered, "I don't know what that means anymore." My heart clenched. Dana reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. "It means we're connected not just by blood, but by love. You don't have to understand it all right now." From that day on, something shifted between them. Lila began asking Dana questions about her life, her family, even Grace. It wasn't easy. The conversations were hesitant, full of pauses, but they were happening. That was enough. Meanwhile, Grace visited often too. The bond between her and Lila grew almost effortlessly. They'd sit together, laughing over shared playlists, whispering secrets that neither Dana nor I were allowed to hear. Watching them made my chest ache. It was bittersweet, seeing the daughters we each raised connect in ways that felt natural and new. Despite the progress, I couldn't stop thinking about Nora. Every evening, after Lila drifted off to sleep, I'd slip into Nora's room. I'd sit by her bedside, holding her hand, telling her about everything she was missing. "Lila's eating solid food again," I'd say. She laughed today. "You did that. You gave her back her life." I started bringing Lila's sketches to show her, placing them on the bedside table. In one drawing, Nora was drawn as an angel with gentle wings. I hoped, somehow, she could see them, that she'd know how much she meant to us. Weeks turned into a month. One morning, as I arrived at the hospital, the nurse handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to me written by Dana. "Elena, I've been thinking about what it means to be a mother. I used to believe it was about who carried the child. But now I know it's about who carries the love. You raised Lila with that kind of love, the kind that saves. I will never take that from you. Whatever happens next, let's be family, not divided by what we lost but united by what we found." I sat there in the hallway, tears streaming down my face, clutching that letter to my chest. For the first time, I felt peace. A few weeks later, Lila was discharged from the hospital. The day we brought her home, the air felt different, softer somehow. She walked slowly, leaning on me for balance, but her eyes were bright. When we stepped through the front door, she looked around and whispered, "It smells like home." That night, Dana and Grace came over for dinner. We sat around the table, awkward at first, but laughter came eventually. Grace and Lila teased each other, and Dana and I shared quiet smiles across the table. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At one point, Lila looked at both of us and said, "I think I have two moms now." Dana's eyes glistened. "You do, sweetheart," I said softly. "And you always will." From then on, we started celebrating together, birthdays, holidays, even the mundane days in between. The girls grew closer, and so did we. I left my job at the hospital a month later. I couldn't walk those halls anymore, not after everything that happened. Instead, I started volunteering at a local foundation for transplant families. I shared our story, not the pain, but the hope that came after. People listened, some cried, many said it gave them strength. One afternoon, while I was filling out paperwork at the foundation office, my phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mrs. Moore?" a nurse said. "It's about Nora Lancaster." My breath caught. "Yes? What about her?" There was a pause. And then the nurse said, "She's awake." For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, the world spinning around me, my heart pounding in disbelief. Then I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. When I burst into Nora's hospital room, Dana was already there, holding her aunt's hand, crying. Nora's eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Did it work?" she whispered. I nodded, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Yes, Nora, you saved her." Her smile widened just enough to light up her face. "Good," she murmured. "Then it was worth it." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You came back to us." She closed her eyes, still smiling. "I promised I would." In that moment, I felt the weight of the past 14 years finally begin to lift. Then one morning, my phone rings, it's the hospital, and Nora is awake. When Nora opens her eyes, it feels like witnessing a rebirth. The day she woke up, the hospital didn't feel like the same place anymore. It wasn't cold and sterile like it used to be, it was alive with quiet joy. The nurses smiled when they passed her room. The same halls that had echoed with fear and grief now felt like they carried light. I remember standing outside her door, frozen, too overwhelmed to step in. When I finally did, the sight took my breath away. Nora was sitting up, her hair brushed back, her eyes soft but alert. She looked fragile, yes, but there was something radiant about her, like she had crossed through something dark and come out lighter on the other side. She looked at me and smiled. "You're crying again," she said weakly. I laughed through my tears. "You gave me permission to, remember?" She chuckled softly, and even that small sound felt like music. Dana stood at her bedside, holding her hand, her own eyes red and shining. Grace and Lila were sitting together by the window, whispering and giggling quietly, like old friends. It was the first time we were all in the same room together, all the broken pieces that life had scattered finally fitting into place. Lila stood and walked toward Nora's bed, her steps slow but steady. She took Nora's hand and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Nora smiled, brushing a weak hand over Lila's hair. "Sweetheart, you were worth every bit of it, you and Grace both." I watched them, my heart full in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. After everything, the lies, the anger, the grief, somehow we had found something whole again. Over the next few weeks, Nora regained her strength. The doctors called her recovery miraculous, saying it was rare for someone her age to pull through such a risky procedure, but Nora just smiled when they said it. "Miracles happen when they're meant to," she told them. It wasn't long before our story spread. One of the nurses, who had followed everything from the start, shared it with a local journalist. A few weeks later, a small article appeared in the local paper. "Hospital mix-up leads to life-saving act of redemption." The story went viral. People all over the country wrote letters, emails, messages, some sent flowers, others shared their own stories of loss and forgiveness. Lila, ever the quiet artist, became the heart of it all. Reporters asked for interviews, but she rarely spoke. When she did, her words silenced entire rooms. "Family isn't about DNA," she said in one interview. "It's about love, and I've been given twice as much as most people ever get." That quote spread like wildfire. It was printed on posters, quoted in blogs, even shared on national news. My little girl, the same one I'd once cradled in my arms, terrified of losing, was now teaching the world what it meant to love beyond limits. She started drawing again too. Her art changed softer, deeper, full of meaning. One of her sketches showed Nora as an angel standing behind two women, Dana and me, who were holding hands. The caption simply read, "We all saved each other." Months later, the hospital officially reopened the investigation into the baby mix-up. They reached out to both Dana and me, offering formal apologies and compensation. But neither of us cared about the money. What mattered was accountability. We wanted to make sure no other mother ever went through what we had. At a press conference, Dana spoke first. "Mistakes happen," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again." The hospital agreed to implement stricter safety protocols for newborn identification, naming them the Lila and Grace Guidelines. Hearing those names announced over the microphone made me cry all over again. In the months that followed, Nora became something of a local hero. The hospital honored her with a plaque for courage and compassion in the face of mistakes that changed lives. She cried when she saw it, saying she didn't deserve it, but we all knew she did. Lila grew stronger every day. Her hair grew back, her cheeks glowed with color, and her laughter, that beautiful sound I thought I'd lost forever, filled our home again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we all gathered in the park: Dana, Grace, Nora, Lila, and me. The girls ran ahead, laughing, while Nora sat on a bench beside me. She leaned back, sighing contentedly. "Do you ever think about how strange life is?" she asked. "How something so tragic can lead to something so beautiful?" "All the time," I said quietly. "Sometimes I still wake up thinking it's all been a dream." She nodded slowly. "Maybe it was meant to happen, not to punish us, but to bring us together." I looked at her, at the way the fading light caught the silver in her hair, and I realized she was right. Sometimes life breaks you just so it can show you what you're made of. We watched the girls playing, their laughter carried on the breeze. Everything had come full circle: the truth, the forgiveness, the healing. And just when I thought our story had finally settled into peace, something else arrived, one more ripple from the past we thought was behind us. A week after that evening in the park, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my house. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter, sealed with Nora's signature. I opened it, my hands trembling. The letter began, "If you're reading this, it means my time has come to an end. But I'm not leaving without making sure what I did means something lasting." But even as peace returns, one final letter from Nora's lawyer reveals something none of us expected. The letter from Nora's lawyer contains her final wish, a request that changes how I see everything. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in my hands. The others were there: Dana, Grace, and Lila, all waiting quietly as I unfolded the pages. Nora's handwriting filled the paper, delicate and precise, each word written with care. My heart squeezed painfully as I read the first line aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say goodbye in person. Please don't cry. My life ended the way it should have, in service to something good. For once I did something right." Lila pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes already brimming with tears. Dana reached for her daughter's hand, and I took Lila's in mine. Together, we listened as I continued reading. "I've spent years haunted by one mistake the night your babies were switched. I thought silence would protect the hospital, but all it did was destroy families. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure my final act helps others find truth where we were denied it." My voice faltered, but I forced myself to keep reading. "I've left my estate, what little I have, to create a scholarship fund for children and families affected by medical negligence. I've named it the Lila and Grace Foundation. Dana and Elena, I'm naming you both co-chairs. It's yours to build, yours to protect. Let it be a reminder that even out of tragedy, something good can grow." I lowered the paper, tears spilling freely down my cheeks. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint whisper of the wind outside. Grace was the first to break the silence. "She really did that?" Dana nodded slowly. "Of course she did. That's who she was, always trying to fix the things that broke her." Lila leaned against me, crying softly. "She saved me once," she said. "And now she's saving other people too." I wiped her tears with my thumb and kissed her forehead. "She'll keep saving people for generations." Over the next few months, Dana and I threw ourselves into building Nora's foundation. We met with lawyers, accountants, and community leaders. We designed the logo ourselves, two hands holding a small heart, surrounded by a circle. The heart was divided into two halves, one labeled L and the other G. When the foundation officially launched, the turnout was overwhelming. People came from all over: hospital staff, former patients, mothers, children. Some brought flowers, others brought letters of gratitude. A local journalist covered the event, calling it a legacy born from loss. As Dana stood at the podium giving her speech, I watched her with quiet admiration. "This foundation," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion, "isn't just about justice. It's about love, the kind that heals wounds deeper than any scalpel could reach." When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had followed our story from heartbreak to hope. "There's no such thing as the perfect family," I began. "We're built from imperfections, from mistakes, forgiveness, and second chances. Nora taught us that even broken things can be beautiful if you care enough to mend them." The applause was thunderous, but what touched me most was seeing Lila and Grace in the front row, holding hands and smiling through tears. The months that followed were peaceful. Lila grew stronger with each passing day. She started volunteering at the foundation after school, helping organize events and meeting other transplant families. Grace joined her often. The two were inseparable now, sisters in every sense of the word. One afternoon, while we were at the foundation's office, Lila handed me a college brochure. "I think I know what I want to do," she said shyly. I glanced at it, a medical program focused on nephrology. My throat tightened. "You want to be a kidney specialist?" She nodded. "I want to help kids like me. I want to be the person who gives hope when everyone else says it's too late." Dana walked in just then and overheard her. She smiled proudly, tears welling in her eyes. "You'll be incredible," she said. Watching them both, I felt something settle inside me, a peace I hadn't known in years. A few months later, on the anniversary of Nora's death, we visited her grave. The headstone was simple, engraved with the words, "She gave life twice." We brought flowers, white lilies, and lavender, her favorites. Lila placed one of her sketches at the base of the stone. It showed Nora surrounded by light, her hands resting gently on two hearts labeled Lila and Grace. I knelt beside the grave, tracing the engraved letters with my fingertips. "You did it, Nora," I whispered. "You made things right." The wind stirred the trees, and I could almost feel her presence, soft, reassuring, eternal. As we left the cemetery, Lila slipped her hand into mine. "Do you think she knows?" she asked quietly. "I think she's watching every day," I said. "And I think she's proud." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood in the backyard while Lila and Grace chased fireflies. The golden light danced across their faces, their laughter filling the air. Dana joined me, holding 2 mugs of tea. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said. I smiled. "More than I ever thought possible." We stood there for a while, watching the girls run through the grass, their joy lighting up the twilight. When the first stars appeared, I whispered a quiet thank you not just to Nora, but to fate itself, for leading us through the darkness into something that felt like home again. As I stand there, I whisper to the wind, "You gave me back my daughter, and my faith in humanity."